you've got what could have been a really like almost Clint Eastwoodian moment where he tells him he's got killer eyes, but you don't have killer eyes. Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Real Impact. I am your host, Tom Bilyeu, and I took myself from scrounging in my couch cushions to find enough change to put gas in my car to building a billion-dollar business on the backs of things that I read, movies that I watched, TV shows, everything. All of that stuff has incredibly powerful lessons if you're willing to dive in and extract them. And that is what this show is all about. And I am flanked on my left and right by two incredible people, excellent purveyors of knowledge and information, and amazing at business as well. On my left, I have Dr. Finesse, and on my right, I have Casey Files Elliott, and today we are talking about 12 Strong. Spoiler alert! So we are going to go in on this, talking about themes and things that you can pull out from your own life, decisions that were made, and this movie is ripe with decisions. Without further ado, segment one, I want to know, what'd you guys think? What were those general thoughts about this bad boy?
You know, it's weird. I'm still chewing on it. It's I enjoyed the movie for what it was. It's something about war movies that deal with conflicts that took place in the last 15 years within it, that I don't know, because the proximity of time of when it happened to now, it's hard to glamorize it. I can't put my finger on it.
And you want the glamour?
I know I don't want the glamour, but when you see like Saving Private Ryan, it's gritty as it gets, right? But it's easy to glamorify that movie. You know what I mean? You could be like, oh yeah, Saving Private Ryan, yeah, we defeated the Nazis and blah blah blah. You know what I mean? But there's something about a conflict that took place not too long ago, and knowing people who are in the conflict still, especially me personally, coming up as a military brat, army brat, and having friends who joined the army and are in the conflict, it's hard for me to watch a film that's deemed as entertainment for this. That being said, if I put that aside, it was fun. I enjoyed it. Chris Hemsworth is cool. It's my wife's free pass, Chris Hemsworth, and she always says that if she accidentally calls his name in the throes of love, I will never know, because both of our names are Chris. So, but yeah, I like him as an actor. So yeah, it was fun. It was fun, but
in our brief stint as a show, this is the second time that we've covered Mr. Hemsworth, which is pretty interesting. Last one being Thor Ragnarok. This is wildly different. And I will say, for me, this one didn't stick to my ribs. I enjoyed it, though. I was there. It had my attention the whole time. It really made me never want to go to war. And the one thing that I found like a little weird is like, so the whole thing is like, I'm not going to lose a man. Dude, the Afghanistan people were dying left, right, and center. It was like, dude, if you were Afghan, you were toast. So they were just getting shot. And so I was like, oh, it made it a little uncomfortable for me to like really focus on like, he's brought all his guys back, which was cool, but they become a little bit like Star Trek red shirts.
Yes.
And so I was like, oh, so many people dying. And so that was a little hard, but only hard in the sense that somebody had to die to really bring home the viscerality, is that a word? Of like what it would really be like to get shot at, and to know, like every time somebody would poke up from behind cover to shoot, I just thought that is it's so brave to do that. Like they're trying to kill you. So the movie is basically an extended action scene, which I never am the biggest fans of those. This one only hung together for me because it's a true story. That helped. But you started by saying I've still been chewing on this one. And I wanted to say I haven't at all. I watched it. When it was done, I was done.
You spit it out. You're like, pow, done.
It's funny. It made me want to... I felt like, wow, I don't know a lot about this subject matter, and I want to know more, because I do think the thing that I appreciate about it was kind of what you were saying. I felt like I was in that world on the battlefield, and how horrifying that would be, and the confusion of particularly Afghanistan and all these different warring fractions and being in the middle of it. Like, I thought they did a great job of that. But yeah, I agree. I mean, sorry to Hemsworth and your wife, but I do not think he quite pulled this off. I much prefer him as Thor. And maybe that was more a fault of some clunky dialogue than anything else. But yeah, I didn't quite outside of like him riding on a horse with a machine gun, which he can pull off, but some of the more emotional stuff I wasn't quite believing him. So visually it was pretty spectacular. Like when they had and I don't know, maybe you know the type of helicopter that picks up Michael Shannon after he's wounded. Mm-hmm. I mean, that was pretty bitchin'.
Yeah.
It was really cool that it almost felt like I could just feel the filmmakers being like, we get to shoot this helicopter. This is why we did this movie. So, visually it was pretty cool. But otherwise, story-wise, it was not. Even though the real story is amazing, it's kind of crazy when you can't translate something that awesome from real life into a film.
What I would have liked to have seen, in fact, one of the things that I'm going to hold myself to, and I'll drag you guys into this, when I don't like a movie, what could have done to make it better? Mm-hmm. So the movie has, like, at its core, an amazing character study to be done, and that is between the two main characters. The Chris Hemsworth character, is it Nelson? Nielsen?
Yes,
Nelson.
Nelson.
Okay, so you've got Nelson and Dostum. Mm-hmm. And the relationship there is really interesting, but they never go into it.
Yeah.
Now, imagine taking, like, if this movie were, like, 7% action shooting, like we have one sort of punctuated moment where it's the big battle at the end or whatever, and then everything else leading up to it is essentially the dialogue of him saying, you don't have killer eyes. He's got killer eyes. He's got killer eyes. You don't have killer eyes. And then it all becomes like this allegory for America, at least this generation, losing its virginity of like real war. Mm-hmm. Because we had real war in Vietnam. And I think in many ways it sort of got forgotten and brushed aside. We had the modern vision of ourselves really painted during Desert Storm, where we came in and just like everyone surrendered, right? And it was like crazy, and it was over like so fast. And so when we went into this, I think that's what certainly people of my generation, that's what we were expecting, right? Mm-hmm. That we were going to come in, we were going to scare the shit out of them. It was going to be shock and awe. They were going to back off, and this was not going to be that. This was Afghanistan. This is where empires go to die, right? This was like a whole new thing. And so to make the movie about that like relationship of somebody who knows what like suffering over the long run is of that, like there's no the glamorization that America does with conflict, both I think somewhat in the real world media as well as in movie making and things like that. Yeah. If we had watched that relationship unfold, as first he thinks that guy's just like sort of an old guy who doesn't know anything, backwards, you know, kind of guy, and then if we could have watched him realize the truth of the man's depth of character, courage, because he ultimately becomes the vice president of Afghanistan in like real life. Yeah. So there's really something to this guy. And then like the moment, which was really chilling in the movie, as is when he hunts down the guy that killed his family. Yeah. Like, don't you want to know what he said? Yeah. That actor, first of all, was fucking awesome. The best thing in the movie. Yeah. And when he, spoiler alert, obviously, when he shoots the guy that killed his family and is devoid, I have the chills, totally devoid of emotion, and just he says something almost quietly, boom, and shoots him. And I was like, wow. And I so wanted to know, like, in fact, I'm looking it up after this, like what he says.
Why we didn't get to know. I wonder if they just left it as, you know, that's between them. Figure it out if you want to do your own research and find out what he said in that language. But yeah, I was like, oh, I thought the same thing. What did he say? What did he say? So, I mean.
So cool.
And you're so right. They really missed a boat to be able to explore the gray area of good versus evil. Because, we like to think, especially in military movies, that like America's the good and there's a clear villain and it's just an easy good versus bad. But that's not quite... A, that's not how it is, and B, it's really interesting when you can explore those gray areas where people have good.
You didn't think there was good versus bad? Like, in maybe more in this movie than any other. When they show the main bad guy shoot the teacher in front of the little girls, and then, like, the gunshot, that was handled well. I jumped, and it seemed like everybody in our row jumped.
Screamed.
That scene was amazing.
Well, I'm saying,
and really made me like think the Taliban has to die.
Yeah, sure.
Like for real. I
but
was
that's
like
them doing the good versus I'm saying
Yes.
the gray is more interesting. So the stuff
Between
with
Dostum.
Dostum, yeah, exactly.
But
and
that was about morality to you, like a gray, like maybe he lives in the gray. To me, that was about like here's my proposal. I'm not saying it's right, and I'm certainly this isn't what they did in the film. But my proposal is deal with the loss of innocence. Because the guy's a great leader, right? That's why they're willing to follow him, even though he's never been in battle. And that's like the whole thing. He's never been in battle, never been in battle, right? But he understands it. Intellectually, he gets it. But then we get drug into a war in like the worst place ever to have a war, which is the mountains of Afghanistan. He's bright enough to know, like, we have to get this done in 3 weeks. When the Russians tell you to like watch out for a cold winter, like you need to take that seriously.
Yeah.
And so you've got what could have been a really like almost Clint Eastwoodian moment where he tells him he's got killer eyes, but you don't have killer eyes. And then just fucking get up, right? Leave. And it's like the end of the scene and like, oh, don't worry about it, man. Everybody reinforcing you're the intellectual, not saying that, but like kudos, he knows what to do, all that. Then let him have his moment where he takes his first life. Let it really be something, because it was done a little bit too at a distance. You know, it's all like going by so fast. You don't know who he kills, who somebody else kills.
Yeah.
But like, let it be a moment, which they then do have, where he's supposedly like really struggling with it.
Yeah.
But like, really take your time with that moment to see like, okay, now you've got killer eyes, but I don't want the killer eyes, and whoa, this isn't what I thought. But then in the end, he really comes around to then it becomes about something we're going to talk about in a minute, but then it becomes about the difference between a warrior and a soldier, right? And that as he transitions through the movie from and this is me making up, this is not the movie that actually happened, but like this would be profound, I think, to have him go from, I want my killer eyes, I got my killer eyes, now I don't want them, now I understand Dostum, but now it's about going from now sort of like really looking up to him and seeing like, what is it that this guy has? Really let me feel the depths of his pain, right? And what has hardened him. And then watch him go from a very talented soldier to like a well-performed warrior. And then how does that change him as a person? And then what's it like for him to return to his family now as somebody who knows like taking a life and going back to your life and the like the disconnect?
You need to be a studio exec, I mean, like a development exec specifically.
Remake.
Wow, that's a much better film.
Thank you. I mean, and like as I'm thinking like, why didn't it stick to my ribs? It's because that's the story I think they should have been telling, but they didn't tell.
Yeah, I mean, that's development right there. And in fact, I thought it was going to go there. When he started telling him about his killer eyes and going through the room and everyone having killer eyes and not having killer eyes, I thought it was going to go in a different place. I thought it was going to go into a deeper dive. But then it went into like an action film, which is fine. But again, it became an action film. I was like, wait a minute. But I felt like it was a missed opportunity. A missed opportunity. But I don't know. But I do understand what you mean about the gray areas.
I just mean that in the film, there's a clear villain, and not that there aren't clear villains in real life, but I think it's much more complicated when you get there, and they just briefly touched on that with Dotsum's character. But like, I like to use the example of Game of Thrones when I'm talking about gray areas. What I love so much about that show is that you're rooting for so many characters that are at odds with each other. So many.
It's weird.
You love, I mean, and you know, sometimes they end up joining forces by now at this point, but at the beginning, you love Tyrion, but you're supposed to hate the Lannisters.
Yes.
You hate Jaime Lannister, and now you're like, wait a minute, like, I'm rooting for him. Even when he's literally battling Daenerys, and you want them both to win.
Though. That is a perfect example.
So just the complexities of like, there's not necessarily one good and one bad. It's just life is more complicated than that.
I respect that. All right, next segment up is our favorite Cold Stone Themery. All right, so what are we going to be talking about there?
Well, you touched on it a little bit. Dotsum basically sort of accuses Nelson, can't keep that name in my head, Nelson, of being a soldier and not a warrior. So what is the difference between a soldier and a warrior?
I think it's easy. I mean, a soldier could be someone who's assigned a task, someone who takes orders. But actually, I'll just give a direct correlation. Okay. So there are people who join the military for many different reasons. There are people who join the military for economic reasons. There are people who are immigrants, like my dad, who became naturalized and joined the army because he figured, he's like, I can't land a job working anywhere here, and no one takes me seriously because I have an accent. Coming from South America in his 20s, and someone mentioned, well, you should join the military. You get to travel the world. You're going to have a pension. If you do it just for a couple of years, you get a GI Bill, whatever. And my dad is by no means a warrior. I mean, he got trained to be a military guy, but he was not a warrior. I was telling Casey this earlier, going to school, almost everyone I went to school with, because we were all army brats, most of them followed in their father's footsteps. There were a group of guys who went to West Point. And when you go to West Point, you come out of there, you're an officer. Chris Hemsworth character is a perfect example. He didn't see any combat. He was trained in combat. He was trained in assessment, trained in technicalities of combat, but he never experienced combat, right? So he wasn't quite the warrior guy. He came into it as an officer. There are people who joined for convenience. My friends who couldn't afford college, so they joined to get the GI Bill. And then there were the group of friends who you knew right away, this motherfucker's going to be a Green Beret, that guy's going to be an Army Ranger, and that dude's going to be a Night Stalker. You just knew right away because they were like the kids who just craved fights in schools. They didn't care. They went into every fight with zero fear. They would go hunting with their dads. They would play with the guns that their dads would bring home. And they straight up like, I'm going to join the army. I want to do this. I want to be a Green Beret. And they would say it. And it was a different breed of people. Those are warriors because they went into the army with the mindset that I'm not just going into the army to create a career or be a career infantryman. I want to go out and get the job done and do a task. And those are the people you need. It's the same with police officers. It's not for the faint of heart. A lot of police officers, it's a family tradition. Like, oh, my dad was a police officer, my grandfather was a police officer. And then there are people who just want to bust heads. So, and granted, it bites the system in the ass because you don't want a police officer who has an itchy trigger finger and who's going to bust your head for the sake of it. But at the same time, you're going to want someone protecting the streets who has that mindset.
It's like that speech at the end of A Few Good Men.
Oh, yeah.
It's like, you need men on the wall.
Yes.
Like,
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's a warrior. And I grew up with those kids who I knew was going to go in the military. Like I said, a good chunk of my friends went to West Point, and they're officers, esteemed officers, well-decorated officers, and they've done some things over in Iraq. But yeah, but they weren't the warrior kids who went in and became Army Rangers and had the rigorous training to become an Army Ranger. Those are warriors. That is crazy. And they freaking had killer eyes in 3rd grade. Antoine Enoch, I remember you kicking my ass.
Wow, the name drop.
I know, right?
Call him out.
So yeah, to me, that's the difference.
Yeah. This scene in the movie, it kind of bothers me. It bothered me by the end of the film because, the question is being asked, or the point is being made to Nelson, like, you're a soldier, a warrior comes from here, you don't have that. And I'm like, he doesn't really change that much throughout the movie. We don't get that payoff of him becoming the warrior. He's successful from the jump. He knows exactly what he's doing at every point. In fact, it's Dotson that ends up having a change of heart at the end. And actually, a question for you, Christopher. I was like flabbergasted by the fact that he was going on this very, very important mission and had never been in combat before. Is that real? And then when they got there and they're all like, none of us ride horses, I'm like, what? How? Why would you send people? You know how it works. Yeah. Like, you know that's how they're going to be getting around. Is that real? Is that possible?
I wish I could directly answer it. I don't know for a fact. But
you were so unprepared.
Exactly. But what I do know, there is a prestige and, for example, using the example that I used before, people going to West Point and being trained in tactical command, there is a prestige that come with that. And because a war is like a chess match, you know what I mean? Just going guns blazing. So there is a prestige that comes with that. So maybe that was the case. I can't particularly answer that for sure, but that's what I assume. It is crazy.
I will also say that, look, hopefully wars are coming around infrequently enough that the only people that have experience are now older, and so they're not going to be on the battlefield. Yeah. And even though we're living through sort of a weird time where there was enough combat between, you know, what was going on in the 80s, sort of in the Contra movement, and then, you know, what happened in Desert Storm. And so that there would be people that have combat experience, but not enough for every post. Like, there's no way. Not once you go into a true full-scale war. And then second of all, I don't think that, you know, just because you have experience in Desert Storm, which is in Iraq, doesn't mean you have any experience in Afghanistan, which is completely different terrain.
It's what got us in trouble in Vietnam.
Oh, and then none of them spoke any relevant language except for Russian.
Yeah.
I was like, what?
Yeah.
Again, you're supposed to be, you know, you're going there to work with
But
the locals.
how long before? Not long, right? So
perhaps.
when I'll speak for myself as an undereducated kid, like when the Twin Towers got hit, I'd never heard the name Osama bin Laden ever before.
Oh, really? That was the first time you heard it? Wow.
The very first time. I no idea. I didn't know what language they spoke in Afghanistan. Like, so I don't think that
But
you're
you'd
going to find enough
expect
people that will be prepared.
the captain maybe to know.
But how do you find the collision of, like, okay, yes, you're a captain. You already speak Russian, which is already dope.
That's impressive.
So
Yeah.
that you would also expect them to speak another language. It's like, oh God, at some point, like you're looking for the impossible. And so you're looking for a needle in a haystack. And then let's say that the other people, because he said, like, they've got all this combat experience. I'm choosing between you and 4 other guys. And they've got all this combat experience, but they're not breaking it down the way that he's breaking it down. So you've got one guy that actually seems to really understand the realities of the situation. And then you've got other guys they've killed, but they don't necessarily understand as well. And so who do you put in? And I think from that standpoint, I mean, look, the movie's based on a true story. They chose very well. And he did exactly what he said he was going to do. And the only transformation he could have is internal. But because they're treating the movie like an action film, this is Jerry Bruckheimer, which I had no idea going into the movie, which you told me literally right before we walked in.
Literally, I had no idea going into the movie either. And I was
So,
like, no wonder.
that explains a lot, right?
Yeah.
So in an action film where the only transformation is one of, like, an internal thing, they tried to externalize it quickly in one scene, but you're never going to get to that. So even though I'm sure that you could have, in the way that I described earlier, you could show that transformation. That just wasn't the movie that they tried to make, which is a miss, no question. In terms of, like, the being a warrior or being a soldier, I'll take a totally different approach to this and say I feel wholly unqualified to answer that in the terms of military. So I'll abstract it from that and say that, to me, the difference is somebody who understands something intellectually and somebody who they're driven by something beyond themselves. And I think that's what he means when he's saying in the heart, right?
Yeah.
So he gets it in his head, like, I want to do this for America. But the fascinating part is at the end of the movie when he buries that piece of the World Trade Center, because that was the reason, right? That was his why. And pretty interesting that it was a piece of the World Trade Center and not like the photo of his daughter or something like that to, like, protect their way of life or whatever. So in anybody's life, I think there's the things you do for the head, which I'll call money, and then there's things that you do for the heart, which I'll call, you know, the why of why you work somewhere or why you start a company or any of that. Now, people that have the I'm chasing money, like, you don't have the fortitude, you don't have the depth of conviction that a warrior has. You know, the warrior is like, this is the single most meaningful thing to me. It isn't about the money. It isn't about anything other than to maintain the thing that I'm fighting for, my country, my family, my way of life, my honor, whatever it is. It is something that is beyond the self and encompasses other people. And so, and I just think that, because again, I'm not making any judgments about a real warrior where bullets are flying at your head. And if there's a fine difference, like whether you walk in as a soldier or warrior, to me, I don't give a shit. Like, you're being so, like, hardcore about putting yourself at risk. But like in other aspects of your life, to not tap into the warrior spirit of something beyond me, of fighting for others as well as myself, I think that you really miss an opportunity to have that thing when you need it. And so, oddly enough, I find myself today for the 3rd time leaning on a Nietzsche quote where he says, anybody that has a strong enough why can survive almost any how. Wow. And that was quoted by Viktor Frankl, the guy who survived the Nazi concentration camps, saying that that was exactly what kept people going. And so in Viktor Frankl's case, he's saying when you have something beyond yourself that gives meaning to your suffering, that you really can live through anything. And so that to me, like all of us need to find that warrior spirit in what we're doing to find something that is bigger than ourselves.
Excellent correlation.
Mic drop right there.
I know. I was
There
like,
it is.
Jesus.
Are you
All right.
listening?
And that brings
Audience?
us to segment 3. Case closed.
Spitting the knowledge
Case
today.
closed. So Dostum, part of the complication of Nelson dealing with Dostum is that he's sort of battling all these other factions in Afghanistan. He's the leader of one, but there are others that are as much enemies to him as the Taliban. And there's a situation near the end of the film where he basically bows out because these other factions are also sort of becoming a part of America's plan to take this one city against the Taliban. And so he has a choice to make between, okay, I'm going to see through this plan to defeat this greater evil of the Taliban and join with this other faction or not. Yeah. So there's some competing goals here. So if you have a competing goal like that, how do you choose? How do you make the right choice?
I love this question.
Ooh, how do you make the right choice, Tom? Since you were still sizzling from that last answer, I'll let you dive in.
This is something that I think a lot about, and the coolest quote I've ever heard on this is, "Don't sell out what you want most for what you want right now." Oh. And watching the movie, that was exactly how I felt. Like, this guy, Dostum, is getting into a secondary fight, which, come on, if Napoleon taught us nothing else, don't try to fight two battles at the same time. Like, he's got to decide. Yeah. Like, is this about the Taliban or is this about some petty thing where maybe we have the same beliefs, but it felt like the Catholics breaking off into all these other denominations, and then they're like all fighting within themselves. And you look at, Ireland versus Northern Ireland, and it's like, wait, you guys are blowing yourselves up over some nuanced shit here. Like, if I can't tell, like, quickly why you hate each other, that's probably a bad sign. So it's like, whereas the Taliban, it's like, if you're not down with shooting a teacher because she's trying to educate girls over the age of 8, like, that's pretty big. That's high concept. Yeah. Like, we can agree that, we really fundamentally don't agree. If it gets into, like, the really nuanced shit, like, you've got to just stop and say, okay, wait a second. What do I really want here? So I was so glad in the movie that what you see is this guy willing to put his petty differences aside. Now, I have a fear that the line they reference where he says, for today, I'll let him have the city, but tomorrow we'll see, that they really may be, and I'm so ignorant to the foreign affairs here, but that they may be falling prey to those internecine petty battles.
Certainly are.
Which is just like, it's absolutely fucking absurd. Yeah. And, so I'll just speak ignorantly here and say that the only thing that seems to make sense whenever you're trying to run a central government is to be a centrist, which means you're working your ass off not to let all the things that you want bowl over what other people want. Like, just having the respect that we're never all going to see things the same way ever. Not even like the smartest, most kind people ever think that things should be done the same way. So getting towards the middle where you can understand each other and try to find ways to work together, to me, just seems like the only thing that makes sense. Yeah. So I was disheartened by what felt like, and it sounds like it really is, an allusion to the total dysfunction. But I thought that it was something really, really important to deal with, and is very simple. So what are your goals? Do and believe that which moves you towards your goals. So if teaming up with that guy is going to help you beat the thing that's really the problem, failing to do that, to me, is one of the most catastrophic errors a human can make, because it's true folly.
Yeah.
And you know what is depressed? I'm hearing you say that, and I'm like, it feels like one of the easiest errors to make. It's so hard to turn that noise off, or that emotional decision, when there are other you've got your main goal, but then all these other little complications come up, and you want to focus on those instead of moving toward that main goal, and you want to prioritize that. It's hard to turn that noise off.
Yeah, I mean, this is I'm gonna go broad and then narrow it back in. It's about understanding the people that you're working with, and understanding the people around you, and understanding the sensitivities. It's like what we talked about with even with Principles, reading the book in Principles, and even Captivate. It just comes down to knowing what makes a person tick. Because if you don't know what makes a person tick that you're working with, how are you going to work towards the same goal? How are you going to do that? It's going to be impossible. And the wide spectrum I was going to go into was understanding cultural sensitivities and understanding how the surroundings work and the people and their mindset, using sub-Saharan Africa as an example. Historically, that continent was ruled by the West for a long period of time. West meaning a lot of the European countries. And they came in and carved out borders, imaginary lines, right? Not even considering that sub-Saharan Africa, or Africa as a continent alone, has over 2,000 languages. 2,000 languages.
Wow.
And you have all these separate tribes, all these separate beliefs, all these separate cultures, and you carve out imaginary lines before understanding what makes people tick. So how can you work towards a goal? And especially like, you know, and then the countries pull out and, you know, things don't work in their favor. And you leave a country and a territory in turmoil because they're like, okay, well, this imaginary line that comes through my tribe wasn't there before. So how can they get along? You know what I mean? So that's a really broad way of looking at it. So going back to Afghanistan or going back to business in general, if you're coming together, working with people, working with a team, building a team of people that you've never worked with before, you've got to get to know the person, get to know what makes them tick, get to know their motivation, get to know their mindset. And therefore, you could be sensitive to their differences. But of course, if you're a leader or you're a commander or whatever, or a captain, you got to figure out how to guide those differences and lead it towards the same goal.
You know what? So it's interesting that you say lead them to the same goal, because I think you're right. But there's like such a big step beyond that. Mm-hmm. So that's like, okay, if your first 90 days is to come in and understand where people are so you can meet them where they are so that you can get them to where you want to go, the next 90 years is actually saying, okay, we're all going to agree that this is our goal. And now we're going to do the things to actually get to that goal. And man, I will tell you that reading Long Walk to Freedom by Nelson Mandela really like changed me. Like reading that book, if ever there was somebody who had the right to come out and be pissed and come to power and then just slap everyone around, it's Nelson Mandela, right?
Yeah.
So, and the crazy thing is about apartheid, and having grown up in the 90s when this was all happening, and I just didn't know what the word apartheid meant, and I didn't understand any of this, like, and really didn't until I read the book. He realizes that, well, let me back up. So the whites were the minority. Mm-hmm. And so just from a raw power perspective, once blacks came into power and had control of the government, like they could have just flipped it, right? And now we're going to oppress them and they don't even have the numbers. Yeah. So like good luck rising up, right? So, but Mandela comes out of all this and says, but that's not the goal. The goal wasn't to get revenge. The goal was to create a South Africa that we could all be proud of and love and have like a great life and to be able to enjoy our families. And so it was so easy for him once he knew like we're trying to build the color, I think he called it the colors of the rainbow, South Africa, where like everybody's equal and there's equality. And so it's like, well, that's my goal. Revenge would actually be rad. Like it would feel amazing. Always. But it doesn't help get us towards our goal. And so having that clarity and then working backwards from that, like, but you've got to get everyone to agree. Here's our goal, right? So I always put it back in a business context because that I understand. Like, here's our goal. Now, when we get into petty differences, it's so easy to say, whose way is more likely to lead us there, right? Does coming out and slapping people around move us towards the goal? Because if it does, let's start slapping people. Oh, it doesn't. So then what does, right? And it was so incredible. Like, so I was pulling clips for the Twitch show that we're doing. And so I started watching Invictus, which is about Long Walk to Freedom. And then that led me to like news footage from the time around Mandela's death. And they had one bodyguard of Mandela's who actually was part of the team that was like harassing him before like he came into power. And so he was like, oh, when he first took power, I thought this guy is total bullshit. Like, he's so going to flip it and it's just going to be gnarly, and that the facade was all going to crumble. And then he said, then the facade never crumbled, and you realize that that was really him, and that was like his sincere efforts. And I just thought that's consistency over time. That's knowing what the goal is, acting in accordance with the goal at all times, and knowing that over time, like, that's going to play out. And that to me is like, if you want to go in somewhere, it's not all about going, oh, we accept everybody's differences. Fuck that. It's like, I don't accept if somebody wants to be a divisive asshole. I only accept we're moving towards this goal. So there's no place for divisive assholes. And looking at the world like that to me is where it gets when it's super goal oriented.
That's some strength of character right there for obviously Mr. Mandela.
Yeah.
But we can only hope that there are some more souls out there that can have that consistency that you're talking about.
Yeah, and like, so even abstracted a second from him, because I do think that there are precious few people. Like, I like to think that I've really thought about some shit. And dude, like when I look into my soul, I don't want to be tested like that.
No.
I'm just gonna be really honest with you.
Never.
Like, no, thank you.
Never.
And partly because I'm not sure I make it through 27 years. So, so I won't even put myself in that same class. So we need to be able to survive with a mechanism that doesn't require people to be that fucking badass.
Yeah.
So to me, it comes down to, and again, I'll just lessen it and put it in a business context, but it fucking makes sense. Like it makes sense. So it's coming to agree on the goal and then getting rid of the ego. And I won't go into, if you want to hear more, and I talk a lot about how to build your ego around something that's empowering on my /Tom Bilyeu channel. But yeah, you've got to build your ego, your pride, and all of that around something that doesn't get caught up in being right and all of that bullshit. So I will leave it at that. But that is certainly something that I wish the movie had explored better.
Yeah.
Because it's there, it's ripe. Like that whole situation is meant to deal with that.
The gray areas.
Totally and
gray
completely
areas.
agree.
Word. All right. Next up, would you rather?
Would
One
you
of the most fun
rather?
segments.
Would
Which, by
you
the way, we want
rather?
you guys to drop into the comments. We're about to ask a question. We'll give the answer of what we would rather, but we want to know what you would rather. Drop that into the comments. Let us know as we go.
So in the film, of course, as you can tell from the title, 12, there's a team of 12 that Nelson is leading. And he has to make a few tactical decisions throughout the film with the team. One of those being a few members of the team are going to be sent off ahead into what seems like the most dangerous place possible to set up a certain part of the mission. And so Nelson as captain has to make this decision and order them to do this for him and for the mission. And so the team is basically, this is his first time out. He's feeling a little nervous about giving that order. And so the question here, would you rather make it, have an order from your captain to go do this deed, or would you rather make the decision yourself? Are you going to lean on your leader to give you that order, or do you want to make the decision yourself?
For me, I'm not that I'm a follower, but I stick to the rules of hierarchy. If I have a leader, I like to think that they lead for a reason, and they are a leader for a reason. Of course, I like to make my own decisions here and there, and I like to accept my specialty, but I strongly believe in obeying the rules of command and not necessarily making my own decisions, going against making my own decisions, but I have that respect. Again, circling back, I think this comes from growing up in a military household. Almost any dad who's in the Army, Air Force, Marines, Navy, whatever, Coast Guard, what they learned in command is, they apply it at home. It's very applicable. And I grew up that way. So I've always been someone who kind of respected the word of the leader. I mean, sometimes, of course, you hear something that's outrageous and you don't agree with it. But especially in this case, if your life depends on it, and it's not like the business is going to fail, your life is going to fail. So it's a little different story, but that's just how it is. I mean, to me, it's easy. I would 100% in this case, take the command from the leader. It's just how it is.
It's interesting. I think I've spoken before about how decision-making gives me anxiety and sweaty palms a lot of times.
Can you recap
big
why
decisions.
it gives you anxiety?
Can I recap?
Yeah.
I guess it's the responsibility of making the decision, which is what leaders do. Mm-hmm. Hope that doesn't make me a follower, but maybe that's okay. We need both, right? But I think in this situation, it's interesting because they clearly want him to make this order, to step into his true role as the leader of this group so that they're of course going to do it.
Yeah.
That he's the leader, but he has to take that responsibility and show them that like this is the right course of action to take. And so for me, I would definitely want to have that. I'm not the leader in that situation, I don't think. So I want to take an order from someone who is confident and who I can follow and know that I'm making the right decision, because they told me it was, that sounds bad. They told me it was the right decision, but what I mean by that is I trust their decision making. I trust their leadership. They have guided me into this situation.
You're a team player.
Yeah, exactly. There you go. Thanks, Christopher.
It's interesting. So for me, without question, it needs to be my decision. So if even if there was,
shocked?
and now I want to set it up the way that it was set up in the film.
Yeah.
So he says, I can't order you to do this.
Yep.
This has to be your decision. And it was him not wanting. He had the sweaty palms at that moment,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
About not wanting to
Exactly.
be responsible for them dying if they die, because the odds really were that they, I mean, by all accounts, they should have died. It's pretty impressive that they didn't. And the guy goes, yeah, you can. Like, you just tell us that we have to do it and that it's an order and we'll do it. And I thought that was pretty interesting because it was everybody not wanting to be responsible. So he didn't want to be responsible for them. They didn't want, and for some reason, even though it's not cut this way, I just really felt like that character whose name in real life I'm forgetting, but you see him everywhere.
Michael Shannon, you're
Michael
talking
Pena.
about?
Michael Pena.
Michael, yes.
And he says, I imagine him like trying to explain to his wife, right? Like, I'm not going to put myself in harm's way, but if I have an order, like I so buy into the military ethos. And it was such a cool moment where he says, you know, oh, I'd follow you into that. Actually, I'd follow you anywhere, right? And that's actually a beautiful thing when you find somebody that inspires you like that. And to know that it is an equal exchange of value, right? So this goes back to the wolves. It's like, it was interesting because the word follower you don't like. But if you get rid of the word follower and you use something like teammate or alpha and beta, where you have people that have all this tremendous power in their role, but their role isn't to be the decision maker, either because they're not trained to be in that scenario or they don't want to be. And so breaking away from like the moral judgment of, oh, leaders are good and followers are bad. What you saw in that moment, I thought was something actually really beautiful. And in that, I did not see in myself something like, oh, yeah, it's amazing, I do the right thing and other people don't. I thought it's really interesting how I've built something up in my mind that, which you could even call a sickness, right? And then say, I have a compulsion to need to control my destiny. I have a compulsion to need for that to be me. And one of the things that I find so interesting is I actually value more in myself that if I had a leader and they told me to do it, that I would do it. And so for me, the more beautiful moment in the movie was when he says, I would follow you anywhere. And so talking to Jocko Willink, the guy that wrote Extreme Ownership, super famous at this point, Navy SEAL, real life guy. And he talked about how leaders have to sometimes be leaders and sometimes be followers. And you've got to be able to seamlessly switch in and out of both. And that it isn't about ego. And so, you know, to me, when the honest answer is I would want to make the decision for myself, but I would actually struggle in the opposite direction of going, is that just ego where I need to be in control, or could I as fluidly follow somebody when they're the right person to follow? And I always think it comes down to that. Like it needs to be this fluid move based on, do you have like credibility in this area or not? So because the setup in the movie is purely about, are you going to take ownership for your own life and death? And that I would want to. So in that, I think that with my belief system, it is important and it would be the right decision. But later, if somebody else was in command or whatever, like if Dostum had really presented it, like he seemed like sometimes maybe you couldn't trust him. So, but let's just say that you could. And I knew he knew more about the terrain and the people and all that. If he said, go do this, I wouldn't be like, well, what do you mean? I'd be like, I'm doing it, right? He's lived this long. He's lasted through the Russians and everybody else that's come in.
He knows this
right.
Mountaintop in and out. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Now Where your thumbs at? Where your thumbs at? This is a segment where we go in and we break the movie down in two ways. One, just is it a good movie cinematically, artistically? Does it tell a good story? And then mindset. Is there enough here to really chew on, to think about, that you can take and actually add value to your real life? So where your thumbs at, boys and girl?
Okay, so I began by saying I was chewing on this. I think I'm done chewing. And getting feedback from you two and understanding what you thought of the film. I have a decision, finally.
Drum roll, please.
So for a film, you know, it's right down the middle. It was fun, great action, cool concept, but it didn't fully deliver, because I feel like the film didn't quite know what it wanted to be. At some moments it felt like a drama, other moments it felt like an action film, and then of course they had a little bit of comedy in it, but I feel like with any Bruckheimer film, it's always action comedy, so you had to fulfill that for the audience. So yeah, it just didn't know what it wanted to be as a film. So I give it, just this for being a good film. And I think, I don't know, I feel like some people may enjoy it more than others. It definitely has an audience, but yeah, not for me. And for mindset, here also, there would have been a point where walking out, I was like, oh, maybe mindset's here because it had the intent, and there's a lot of good trinkets in there where you think like, okay, good, I know what they're saying, I know where they're going with this. But that moment where you broke it down, Tom broke it down earlier and decided this is the film it should have been. And
we should make that just a regular segment.
Yeah,
like
I'm telling you.
Tom's take.
Yeah, and I was like, yeah, that's a good film right there. A development exec right here. So after hearing that, I definitely give a mindset neutral. So I'm neutral straight across the board. I didn't hate it, didn't love it, straight across.
It's interesting. I often, the longer I ruminate on a film, the more my opinion goes one way or the other. Mm-hmm. And so for this one, I walked out of it with a neutral, but now I'm actually going to go to
Whoa,
this.
Interesting.
After this discussion. And from a film perspective, first of all, this film had a pretty great cast.
Yeah.
They had Michael Shannon,
who got to do
nothing.
Yeah,
he is so awesome, and I'm like,
his back
was he
even disappeared?
I'm like, why is he in this movie?
That was weird.
What the hell? They had the guy from Moonlight. I'm sorry, I should say his name. I don't know if you realize that.
Yes,
Trevante Rose.
I was like, where do I know this guy from?
I mean, I'll tell you what, I don't want to get into this right now, but if you're black, you can spot another black face anywhere. You're like, yo, he was in that Coca-Cola commercial. It doesn't matter. So yes, I knew right away.
So, and Michael Pena, as we've already mentioned, a lot of great actors, and I just felt like, it's a waste. And for as much as I sort of appreciated some of the visual stuff, it just didn't make up for the just general blah of the film from a really badass real story. So I went down. And then I'm also going to go down on mindset.
Damn.
Because I'm disappointed hearing where it could have gone and how many opportunities there were to really be amazing from a mindset perspective.
Thanks a lot, Tom.
It just, it just failed. So it's almost like if it was a movie that maybe didn't have the potential just because of what it was about to go that strong in mindset, that'd be one thing. But they just missed the boat on that. So sorry, 2 thumbs down.
So I'm just gonna have to say that the movie to me is straight down the middle. I think you said it perfectly. And as soon as it was over, I was like, yeah, that was good. But it wasn't didn't really have me. But no one's gonna watch it and be bored.
That's true.
It's down the middle.
Yeah.
And then from a mindset perspective, I'm right there with you, Christopher. I think that they bring up enough interesting stuff that even though they don't cover it well, it at least made me think the things that I thought. And so going through what the movie could have been, I was like, that was actually fun, right? To really think about what it should have been. So I'm grateful to them for bringing it up. And I don't think if you're looking for a Netflix and chill on a Friday night kind of thing, you'll be fine.
That's amazing.
Just
won't
don't
leave
think
you
too hard about Tom's version because it'll ruin the movie for you.
Yeah, sorry.
That could have been a deal.
Tom's superior version.
And hey, at the end of the day, I'm super stoked that you guys like that. And that was totally unprompted, unrehearsed, by the way. I literally didn't even think about it until we were doing it in real time. But that's what Impact Theory Studios is about, motherfuckers. Ultimately, we're going to be making these for ourselves. So even though I always feel a little bit bad, I know how hard it is to make a movie. So to the filmmakers, we're super grateful. Thank you for letting us think through something and get to what we think is a better film now. And so we're coming for you. All right, guys. Thank you so much for joining us. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe. And until next time, my friends, be legendary. Take care.